Good afternoon and welcome everyone to the Texas Realtors Annual Conference Public Policy Forum. I'm Jeff Kahn from Lubbock and I'm Vice Chair of the Public Policy Oversight Committee. Before we begin, I'd like to recognize our 2020 Public Policy Oversight Chair and past Chairman of the Texas Realtors, Kaki Libbert, as well as our 2020 Committee Liaison, Mario Arriaga. We're also excited to be able to share this program with you today. I'd also like to acknowledge the other members of our Oversight Committee, the chairs and vice chairs of each of our 4 public policy committees: business issues, infrastructure, land use, and taxation. These committees have been putting in hours upon hours of work over the past several months to draft our association's public policy priorities for the next session, which begins January 12th, 2021. Following the discussion with our special guests, the Public Policy Oversight Committee will convene and discuss our preliminary state of the policy priorities. This meeting is open to all Texas Realtors, so you're welcome to stay on and listen to the debate. When you're registered for today's program, you had the opportunity to submit questions to the panel. Thanks to each of you who did so. We have incorporated these questions wherever possible into our interview with our panelists. Your insightful questions and comments showcase what makes our members and our association so outstanding. Today we are using Zoom's webinar platform. If you have questions for our panelists, please submit them through the Q&A feature. Staff will be monitoring these questions, and if we have time at the end of our panel, we will answer as many of these as possible. Our forum will touch on the complicated topics our state legislatures will face when they are convening in January of 2021. We have 3 lawmakers with us today who are well qualified and well positioned to provide insight into these complex issues. I'm honored to introduce our panelists. So with us today, we have Representative Sarah Davis. She's beginning her 5th term representing Texas House District 134 in Houston. It's including but not limited to, in her long history of leadership in the Texas House, she has served as the chair of the General Investigating and Ethics Committee, chair of the Appropriations Subcommittee on Health and Human Services, and a member of the Corrections Committee, the Calendars Committee, and the Committee on Insurance. She's also the current vice chair of the Harris County Delegation, secretary of the Women's Health Caucus, and the Speaker's appointee to the Texas Access to Justice Commission. A graduate of Dulles High School in Sugar Land in 1994, Chairman Davis earned a bachelor's degree in economics from Baylor and a law degree from the University of Houston. She is a breast cancer survivor and lives with her husband, Kent Adams, and their Yorkie Barrett in Houston's Museum District. And according to her Twitter, my favorite line I've read today, she is known to be scrappy. So Chairman Davis, thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Chairman James White is a native Texan, proudly representing the people of Polk, Hardin, Jasper, Newton, and Tyler counties in Southeast Texas. He was first elected to the Texas House of Representatives in 2010, and since then has been recognized with various awards, including 2019 Best Legislature by the Texas Monthly Magazine, Champions for Free Enterprise by Texas Association of Business, and a 100% rating from the National Federation of Independent Business in Texas. Representative White currently serves as chairman of the House Committee on Corrections and sits on the Judiciary and Civil Jurisprudence, Redistricting, and Driver's License Issuance and Renewal Committees. He has previously served on many standing and special committees on the legislature, ranging from agriculture and county affairs to human trafficking and emerging issues in law enforcement. Chairman White attended Houston ISD Public Schools before graduating with honors from Prairie View A&M University with a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science. He then completed a doctorate in political science at the University of Houston and went on to become a public school teacher and a coach. He and his wife, Jim, reside in Tyler County, where they maintain a small cattle ranch. Chairman White is also an active member of the Veterans of Foreign Wars, American Legion, and the Texas Farm Bureau. Chairman White, thank you for joining us today. Last but not least, we have Dr. Mary Gonzalez. She will be joining us shortly. She's wrapping up a call, but she is the representative for House District 75, to which she was first elected in 2012. Her district includes East El Paso County, the fastest growing parts of the city of El Paso, and the towns of San Elizario, Socorro, Flint, Fabbins, and Tornillo. Throughout her history at the Texas Capitol, she has been a champion for public schools, increased economic development, and the Texas agriculture industry. She currently serves on the Appropriations Committee, the Public Education Committee, and is vice chair of the Local and Consent Calendar Committees. She was also recently appointed to the powerful Legislative Budget Board. She is a vice chair for the Mexican American Legislative Caucus, secretary for the House Border Caucus, and chair of the new Texas House LGBTQ Caucus. Representative Gonzalez, also known as Dr. Gonzalez, was also elected vice chair of the National Board of Hispanic Caucus Chairs, becoming the youngest inductee into the El Paso Women's Hall of Fame, and was recognized as a leader of promise by the YWCA of Greater Austin in honor of her commitment to eliminating racism and empowering women. She received her bachelor's degree from the University of Texas at Austin, a master's degree from St. Edward's University, and a doctoral degree in curriculum and institution cultural studies and education at UT Austin, where she completed that one, get this, during a legislative session, which should come with a special kind of honor. So thank you all for being here today. We've got a lot of questions to go through, and we will chime in Dr. Gonzalez when she arrives. First, and most importantly, Chairman Davis and White, how are things where you are?
Well, thank you so much for that question, and we're proud to be on this call today with you, and we hope that we have some of our great constituents from Polk, Tyler, Jasper, Newton, and Hardin counties, and we did have a very rocky 18 hours. We are definitely out of the event that's Hurricane Laura. We're very blessed that we have not seen a significant or even a minor loss of life as of now. We do have some debris damage, and we do have many of our fellow constituents that are without power. But overall, we are blessed with the outcome.
Absolutely. And Chairman Davis, how about you?
Yes, we were also very blessed here in Houston. There was a very anxious 48 hours where we were watching, Laura coming straight to Houston, and it did make that turn. And so Houston was spared, from the effects of Laura totally. So we have power and no loss of life, and, things are just turning back to concentrating again on COVID, which is what's taken up most of our attention since March.
Absolutely. Well, we are continuing to pray for your communities, and please let us know if the Texas Realtors can do anything for any of your constituents there. Speaking of COVID, it wouldn't make much sense to start our discussion anywhere but March 2020. We had a little incident happen there where everything changed. Before COVID started, it appeared the biggest task facing the 87th legislature was going to be redistricting, maybe followed by some measure of healthcare reform. However, now that there's been not only a shift, but an explosion of concerns we are hearing from our members, I expect that you'll be hearing from your constituents as well. What are each of you talking about most back? What are the biggest priorities for you when you're talking with your constituents back home? And we'll start with you, Representative White.
Thank you so much for that. And Jeff, this is what I believe. I think this pandemic has actually highlighted the challenges that you just talked about that need addressing next session. When I look at this COVID-19 scenario, a lot of our Texans with these health conditions, asthma, other respiratory diseases, heart disease, diabetes, generally we need to do things that improve the overall health outcomes for our citizens. Also, when you look at education, either if it's K through 12 or higher ed, I think a lot of our parents have a renewed value in K through 12 education. I think our society sees the value, not only from an education standpoint, but also for making sure that our kids have wholesome environments to go to, and that the contributions of our higher ed that they have played in this pandemic by doing their research and earnestly coming up with cures and therapeutics to combat COVID-19. So I think COVID-19 really highlights the challenges of the next session.
Yes, I agree. I think one of the biggest lessons that we're learning about COVID is just how cobbled together our healthcare system is. And, you know, as chair of Article 2, I'm pretty biased of always wanting to talk about healthcare and access, but COVID has really highlighted the challenges that so many Texans have to accessing healthcare. I mean, we already had the highest level of uninsured in the nation, and then with COVID and all of the unemployment, and folks losing their health insurance because it's tied to their employment has really just exacerbated the challenges we see in healthcare. And I do represent the world's largest Texas medical center in Houston, Texas. And so that is the subject not only that I'm passionate about, but that I hear most about from my constituents. And then followed by, you know, our economy and the hit that small businesses have really been taking in Houston and of course all across the state. But healthcare and the economy are really what are the issues that I hear most about. And like Chairman White said, of course, with so many parents having to work from home and school from home, I think that there is definitely a renewed value and how important it is that our kids, are getting good classroom instruction. But definitely for my neck of the woods in Houston, everything is about healthcare.
Wonderful, and welcome Dr. Gonzalez, who was able to join us. We were just discussing what are the biggest priorities your constituents are talking to you about in this time of COVID. Would you like to chime in for what the folks near El Paso are saying? And we may have a little bit of a frozen screen there. Dr. Gonzalez, can you hear us? No problem. We're going to let Dr. Gonzalez work on that issue there. We're going to continue on with the next question. And Dr. Gonzalez, you're back now. Are you able to chime in now?
It's living in the country. Sometimes the internet out here is a little bit unreliable, which is probably one of the issues I hear about right now in the times of the coronavirus is the digital divide that exists, everyone is really experiencing. I'm working right now and having a hard time just getting my work done because the internet can be a little bit unreliable. Other things we're hearing is concerns about the future, the budget, but something that's really hit home is that about a year ago, El Paso went through the shooting, and the 1 year mark just recently passed us, and that reality is still in a lot of people's minds and wanting to see some resolution this next legislative session around the shooting dynamics.
Absolutely. Well, we're glad you're here with us today. Regarding COVID and the budget, most like the general priorities, outlook on our state budget has changed quite a bit. We were expecting a budget surplus, and now we're staring down some significant shortfalls. The governor has requested state agencies to reduce their budgets across the board, and the comptroller in July was forecasting a $4.6 billion deficit. And we'll start with you, Dr. Gonzalez, and we'll ask all three of you to answer this. How is the legislature going to address this shortfall?
You're asking us to have a crystal ball about what the legislature is going to do or even look like next session. That's really difficult. But what I will say is I think all of us believe that the budget is a moral document. It's a testament to what we think is important. And so I cannot predict what we're going to do. I think that we are sadly going to maybe see some cuts. Hopefully we see lots of opportunities for revenue generation because ultimately, what we want to make sure is we're protecting all of our most vulnerable citizens in the state of Texas from especially some of those investments we were able to make during the last legislative session. Also, just want to say a quick hello to my colleagues. Hi, Representative White, and hi, Representative Davis.
How you doing there, Mary?
Oh, so good to see y'all, and I hope y'all are staying safe. I know your weather areas are, so just good to see your faces.
Representative White, do you want to tackle that question about the budget and
Yes.
COVID?
Yes, thank you. Real quick, we've got to responsibly and safely reopen our economy to generate those revenues from our small businesses and our industry. We have to go into session looking at ways and how we facilitate these industries that are still going to be recovering from these shutdowns, lockdowns, and whatever downs, right? So we're going to need to look at regulatory relief and maybe even tax cuts to stimulate this economy, close that gap, grow our local prosperity.
Go ahead, Representative Davis.
So, I agree with Mary. It's, it's difficult looking in, to this crystal ball of what we're going to have to deal with. I don't think that there is any possibility that we're not going to have to kind of go through the budget and really scrub it to see, are there places where we're going to have to reduce spending? We spend almost $1 billion on border security, and we're the only, border state that spends its own GR on that. And, I think we need to have a discussion as to whether or not we need to continue that level of funding in light of so many needs that we have across the state. I think we're going to obviously have to use the Economic Stabilization Fund or the Rainy Day Fund. We know just going into the next session that we're going to be billions of dollars in the hole. Before COVID, we were going to have, a $2.5 billion Medicaid bill that was going to be due, and that was before COVID. So I also think we're going to have to look at ways where we can find additional federal dollars. We know we've been given billions of dollars in CARES Act funding, but the legislature has largely been sidelined in how that money is being spent. And so as an appropriator, I'm very interested in weighing in on that. And also, if we're thinking about, is there going to be future federal dollars and additional federal dollars in terms of Medicaid? Because like I mentioned earlier, when you're looking at a situation with so many people uninsured and in the middle of a pandemic, and we have expiration of what's called the 1115 Medicaid waiver, we're going to be losing billions of dollars with that if we don't have a conversation about, expanding in the Medicaid population, then I think we could have some very serious problems with the healthcare in this system. And I think it's an easy place to look because we're always looking for federal dollars.
You hit on something that I'm curious. Typically, the House doesn't try to tap into the Economic Stabilization Fund or the Rainy Day Fund. Is that avoidable this session? And if we do pull money from that, what could everyone agree on to spend that money for?
So first of all, we always use money from the Rainy Day Fund. We just don't do it for the current budget. We build in the use and we use it in what's called the supplemental. So we always use the Rainy Day Fund. And we used it we use it literally every session. I've been in the legislature now for 10 years. My first couple of sessions, that pot of money was sort of seen as like 100% sacred, not allowed to touch it for reoccurring expenses. But then we had things like Hurricane Harvey devastating, huge swaths of the state. And we also were hearing from the comptroller that sitting on billions and billions of dollars while our healthcare and other infrastructure erodes could actually have a negative impact on the state's credit rating. So just saving money for the sake of saving money is actually not smart. And so I think more and more legislators have really heard that message, and they hear their constituents saying, hey, why are our roads horrible? Why is there not enough access to healthcare when we have money available? So before, I think it was a really tough fight to get money out of the Rainy Day Fund, but I've seen a gradual understanding and acceptance of when we need to use that money.
Excellent. Thank you for that explanation. Representative White, let's talk about education funding for a moment.
Yes.
What impacts are you seeing on rural schools? Are they facing more challenges when we're having to force, or in some cases, choose to go to virtual learning? And from your perspective, how does the clearly demonstrated need to extend internet connectivity to all parts of the state factor into budget considerations?
Yes, thank you so much for that question. Being a classroom teacher at one time myself, there's no substitute for the indispensable relationship of a school teacher and a student. And we're seeing that during this pandemic, when we had to do a lot of online instruction, we know the optimal educational format is in person in a classroom. But look, Jeff, we know there's some instances where the internet can be a force multiplier in educating. Now, one of the challenges that we have here out in East Texas and rural Texas in general is the access and the affordable access and the access that really lets you get on that high-speed internet highway and do all the great things that the world has. So we still have a lot of room to work as far as narrowing that digital divide as it exists between rural Texas and our friends in the suburbs and in urban Texas. As it relates to the budget, I would first like to continue to collaborate and lean on the efforts of our folks in the private sector to help us solve this. I think there will be some opportunities where we have co-op type frameworks like you did back in the early 20th century with electricity. You could have some similar setups or frameworks for internet. But what I notice about this internet scenario, Jeff, is that it is changing hourly, daily. Okay, so coming in with too much big government solutions may in fact inhibit scenarios. It may crowd out emerging technologies that can come and deliver these services at a high quality and low cost. So that's what I think how we need to approach this issue of closing the digital divide relatively quickly with our rural friends.
Absolutely. Now, Chairman Davis, connectivity and broadband is not just a real issue. How is that affecting your area in the Houston part of the world?
Well, specifically for my district, it's not the issue that it would be in some, like in Representative White's area, but that doesn't mean that there aren't parts of Houston that suffer from lack of connectivity and devices. Our counties, our city, and even the state has spent hundreds of millions of dollars in purchasing laptops and tablets and hotspots that are being distributed through the school district, through HISD and other school districts now to try and get kids online. But the digital divide is something that is very real. In my specific area, it's my husband and I fighting over bandwidth for the most part when we're both trying to work from home. But I'm lucky in that sense, and I live in a very urban area, so I don't, my constituents don't have that same issue or challenge. But again, that doesn't mean that there aren't communities around my district that aren't suffering, because we know that they are.
Absolutely. Let's shift gears here a little bit to healthcare spending. And Representative Davis, we'll start with you. You served on the subcommittee which appropriates health and human services funding since 2013 and chaired the committee for the last 2 sessions. These expenditures are the largest portion of the appropriated funds in the Texas budget. With the current health crisis and its financial impact, what additional scrutiny do you anticipate this portion of the budget will face?
Well, like all parts of the budget, it's going to be scrutinized. The big three, so to speak, the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the speaker have already requested that the agencies cut their budgets by 5% for the 2021 biennium. And I've seen those proposed cuts and very much oppose them and do not believe in the time of a national pandemic, it is appropriate to actually reduce healthcare dollars. But what I do want access to, like I mentioned, is to see how these federal CARES Act dollars have been spent and what will be left of them when the legislature comes back into session, and if there will be additional CARES Act dollars. I know that the state's been very prudent in the way it spends the money because the feds have a lot of guardrails on the dollars. And so we don't want to be in a situation where the state gets audited 5 years from now and the federal government wants to claw back that money. But I've been working with our federal counterparts, like our congressmen and women, kind of pleading that we need more flexibility with those dollars because the state budget's going to have holes just like the city and the county budgets have holes. And so if the feds are giving us this money, we need a little bit more flexibility in how we're able to use that money. But I think we're going to have to look at all the healthcare programs that we've been investing in, but also be very careful because we have made significant investments in things like mental health and substance abuse disorder that we really can't afford to move backwards on in funding those things. And like I mentioned, I think we have to have a very nonpartisan but very real discussion about Medicaid and how we can draw down additional Medicaid dollars.
When you're talking to your counterparts in Congress, is there a chance that real money could be coming, and what would that look like?
Everything seems to be, from what I can tell, everything seems to be pretty deadlocked. I was hopeful for a while that we were going to get some more money. And I know that our individual congressmen and women understand that the states need flexibility, but everything has just become so highly partisan and politicized that it's really hard, I don't know, to get a sense of what's actually going to come down because everybody is just so divided in their respective, political camps.
Absolutely. It is 100% true. You're talking about budget shortfalls. Many of our communities rely on a mix of funding from sales tax and property tax. And with sales taxes down overall, we're seeing a lot of concern from our members and their clients about potential pressures on the property tax side of the equation just to make up the difference. And Dr. Gonzalez, we'll start with you. Texas doesn't have a statewide property tax, but can you explain how the legislature factors property tax revenue into its budget?
Property taxes are huge to Texas. It's about 30% of the revenue we get in all of our state. It helps primarily fund our public schools, but a lot of other areas. And so for us, without property taxes, Texas would be in a really big bind because we don't have an income tax, right? And so I do think it's really important for us to find ways to make sure, for example, I'll give an example. My dad was a teacher for a lot of his life and a county extension agent. And his income did not really grow, but his property taxes were growing. And so it's a really difficult reality for especially people who are public servants, like our teachers and our firefighters, whose income isn't really growing as fast as some of their property values that we need to really consider. But to say we really in Texas depend on property taxes to make our state and our schools function.
Absolutely. Next question, we'll start with Representative Wyatt, and then we'll go up to Representative Davis after that. With the passage of Senate Bill 2 last session, many people thought we'd be done talking about property taxes with you, at least for a little while. Given the new pandemic-driven concerns, what else can legislature do to help with property taxes?
Well, look, it is one of the property taxes, that is, Jeff, it's one of the last taxes, I believe. Maybe there are one or two others out there, but it's one of the last taxes that everyone writes a check for, and you actually have to put it in the mail or go down to the tax assessor collector's office. It's not like some of these other taxes that sort of just magically just come out of your check, and you maybe not figure it out until you do your income taxes. One way that we can help out on this on the state level is really looking at these unfunded mandates. And I know we're going to talk about this later, but one of the biggest unfunded mandates is the Texas Criminal Code, okay? Because all first criminal justice dollars are spent locally by your local property tax dollars. So anything that we can do to reform our criminal code to make sure that we're just not rounding people up and putting them in jail because we're mad at them, not necessarily because we're scared of them. I think Chairman Davis brings up a very good issue where a lot of these uncompensated healthcare costs are being borne by counties, and that's property taxes. So if we could find some other financing mechanisms, that will help too. And I'm always still reminded that at one time, Texas did have a statewide property tax, and we did get rid of that property tax by shifting over, state revenue needs to a consumption tax, a broad-based consumption tax. So we always need to keep that historical context in mind that we can do this, but definitely by tackling unfunded mandates.
Representative Davis, what would you add to that?
I mean, it's hard to add anything to that. I mean, Chairman White is dead on. The only thing I would say, and he mentioned it, and I hate to keep getting on this healthcare soapbox, but a lot of us live in places where the legislature has created hospital districts, like in Houston. We have the Harris Health System, and that is a property taxing jurisdiction. And so you are paying property taxes to pay for the health care of the indigent because the state doesn't have, a program, a statewide really program in place. So a lot of unfunded mandates on the county, but healthcare is is a huge driver for your local property tax. I ask everybody, look at your property tax bill and see, it's not just the city and the county, but look at what you're paying to your local hospital district.
Absolutely. And Representative White, we're going to talk more about judicial reform here in a little bit, but Representative Davis, even before the pandemic, we heard from our members that healthcare was a rising concern, and now it's just at our front door. What are your constituents asking for, and how do you see the healthcare legislation shaping up this session?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, if we don't expand Medicaid and we lose, the billions of dollars that we get from the federal government through the 1115 waiver, which is expiring in 2021, it's just going to, quite frankly, be a disaster. I don't see any way forward in healthcare, because even if we get that waiver, let's say we get these additional dollars, I mean, that waiver was never intended to be a long-term solution to providing healthcare to the uninsured. It was actually created to just help the hospitals and medical community to get ready for the huge influx of newly insured that was theoretically going to be created by the Affordable Care Act. And so now we've just become reliant on these federal dollars as band-aids for our healthcare system. So even if this gets renegotiated, and quite frankly, the administration is tired of giving us these billions of dollars. But even if we get them, it's still not a long-term solution. And our hospitals, and that doesn't even really focus on what's happening to our rural hospitals.
Absolutely. Let's go to a rural area. Dr. Gonzalez, what are your constituents asking for? You're in a little bit different area than Representative Davis.
I mean, especially in these times, what I think what we're really seeing is this divide between the urban and the rural realities that exist in Texas. And one of the things we have to remember is that rural Texas is so important to the fabric and the culture of our whole entire state. Like, if we don't really create a vibrant rural community, where will we get our food and fiber from? And we can't take that for granted. I think what we really need to think about is investment, not just in rural broadband, which y'all have been so great about advocating for, but also things like with things that we have worked together, that y'all's organization and some of our people that in the rural caucus, which is water and wastewater infrastructure for low income and rural Texans, as well as transportation issues. There's a whole set of realities that still need to be addressed in 2020 for our rural communities in Texas.
Absolutely. And thank you for that discussion on healthcare. We're going to change gears here and talk about natural disasters and weather. And this week has been unique in that we've had two potential hurricanes barreling towards the Gulf Coast at the same time, straight out of 2020. It's especially close to the anniversary of Hurricane Harvey. And of course, there's a pandemic going on. So Representative Davis, Harvey was one of the worst natural disasters our country has ever seen. And it directly hit your district as well as Chairman White's. Last session, the legislature passed several bills aimed at improving flood preparation and assisting Texans who have been harmed by these events. Were these changes enough to positively impact our planning for these storms and assist our fellow Texans in the aftermath, or is it too soon for them to have the full effect?
Great question, and I obviously want to hear what Chairman White has to say. And yes, my district was severely impacted by Harvey. I represent a part of a neighborhood in Houston named Meyerland, who flooded out like 3 years in a row. 25% of all structures in Bel Air were flooded. So we were hit very hard, and we did a lot of work last session. I mean, literally billions of dollars put in to programs to allow, similar to what we do with our water infrastructure, so that our municipalities can get low and no interest loans or grants to build in preparation for flooding, and money set aside for specifically for Harvey. But all of those programs, there's always a rule-making process that takes place. And so it takes time really to get those programs up and running. And then I think we were making good progress on the state level, but then COVID hit and everybody's attention sort of shifted to that. So I would say, I think it's a little too soon to say whether or not, what we did is enough or not enough. But I know that everybody worked really hard, and people, like Mary, her district was not, affected by Harvey, but we were so lucky, the members that, were along the Gulf Coast, to have 100% support by our colleagues all across the state, whether or not that they were touched by Harvey, wholeheartedly supporting these packages of bills that again were billions of dollars in state money.
Representative White, what additional resources do your communities need to be better equipped to handle future storms?
Thank you so much. And I think the chairwoman did a very good job laying out the monies that we set aside to help our local communities tackle this issue. But this is what I also see. I see a lot of, we need more discretion and synergy between these local governments, these state entities, and these federal entities. And look, I'm an old infantry officer. And when we used to call the Corps of Engineers to the front lines, they were very efficient in either blasting a way for us to go in and go after the enemy or help us get over an obstacle. But, sometimes working with the Corps of Engineers, I mean, you get into these multi-year permitting and study operations. I mean, we study the studies. So look here, Jeff, my friend. I mean, sometimes when I look at this, I say, I wonder if we could ever build the Hoover Dam or the Panama Canal without spotting ourselves 20 years, because we have to do all of these impact studies, and we have studies that do the studies. Obviously, we need to get the public involved, and we're all for getting the public involved and comment. But we just need more synergy with our federal partners and understand that many of the projects and the funding that we talked about, this was a storm that happened, I believe, in 2017. And here we are almost in 2021. And I just wish we would do it the East Texas way. I just get on my Kubota truck and we just drive down with the bucket loader and we just start, digging ditches and digging things and moving stuff along. So I think we need more of that regulatory discretion and synergy between the government entities.
Yeah, I think we need more of the way the Texas House operates in DC, because even though, during any particular session, there's going to be a handful of highly partisan sort of issues. But the vast majority of the work we do, we work together as colleagues, as state representatives, not as Republican, not as Democrat, but really just trying to make Texas the best place we can, because we all want the same things. We all want Texas to be wonderful and great for our constituents. So, but a lot of times on the state level, our hands get tied, like Chairman White said, by the federal government. And it seems like, they're just sometimes just too busy playing games, partisan games, to really get things done the way we like to get them done in Texas. So I think I wish there was more of the Texas mentality up in Washington, D.C.
Absolutely. We agree. And we agree everyone working together makes it a whole lot better, makes for a better Texas. Dr. Gonzalez, I live in Lubbock and you're in El Paso, and hurricanes are not common in our neck of the woods, but drought and flooding are more common. Last year, the Texas Realtors were proud to help pass a significant flood-related amendments to the mandated seller's disclosure statement. But what else needs to be done? How do you contemplate matters related to disaster preparedness in your district?
I'm really grateful for y'all's support and help in addressing stormwater, because that has been a serious issue out here. And I think people think of the desert and there's like, oh, y'all don't get rain. But when we get rain, we get rain. And then we have arroyos, and then we get flooded out. And we saw in my community and in my district, lots of families lose their homes. So we're really grateful for the work that you've done. But what we need, and what we've always needed, is increased investment in making sure that we're being proactive as opposed to reactive. Recently, one of the things I'm proud of the legislature worked on in a bipartisan way, like Representative Davis said, most of the times we work together just to get things done for Texas, is that we are creating a stormwater flood plan for the entire state of Texas. And that is going to be critical for us building infrastructure, because we've seen flood problems all the way from East Texas to Harris County to El Paso County. And so that just thinking, having that foresight, having that leadership, and Representative White is right. Although in my district, we don't get on a Kubota tractor, we get on a John Deere tractor. Just saying.
Okay.
My dad would be like, what are you talking about, Mary Gonzalez? And I see Warren Ivy and Scott Kestner on here, and so they would know exactly what I'm talking about. But my point of the matter is that we have to be a bit more intentional and proactive, and y'all, your organization has been so great about helping and working in partnership with the legislature to think through what needs to happen.
Representative White, this year has been particularly interesting. We're dealing with the pandemic, and then we've been dealing with protest and civil unrest, because there's a lot of moving pieces, especially when it comes to the criminal justice reform. So this year, there's going to be a lot of discussions from your colleagues and publics that are demanding social change and economic change. How are you and your colleagues going to handle this debate, whether it's on specific deals or just what's going on around the country?
Well, thank you for that question. And criminal justice is by far one of the most important core government activities that any government can execute. We want a government. One reason we structure a government is to maintain the peace, maintain the safety. And I'm just extremely proud of working with all of my colleagues in Austin on this issue. I mean, yes, we know there's a little inflection point right now, probably a big inflection point right now on this issue of criminal justice. But every session that I have served in the legislature, we have done at least two things, okay? We have made withdrawals from the rainy day fund, and we have passed criminal justice reform legislation, and we expect to do the same thing. And Jeff, we're going to approach it like we approach all of it. We're going to make sure that we're upholding the Constitution. We're answering the call of maintaining the peace and maintaining the safety of people. We're going to make sure that it's data driven. We're going to make sure that it delivers efficiencies and savings and effectiveness to taxpayers. And then we do understand that there is a moral component to this, to those that are justice involved and to the victims as well. So that's how that's how I'm going to at least proceed. We're not going to get caught up in press releases and uprisings and protests and violence in other locales in the world or the country. We're going to do it the Texas way, and we're going to do it the right way. And I hope we do some very, very transformational action this session.
Absolutely, and thank you for that. Dr. Gonzalez, what kind of engagement are you seeing from your constituents in your area regarding criminal justice reform?
Wow. I think what we're seeing is a very intersectional look at some of these issues, and how in order to have criminal justice reform, we have to have reforms in a lot of other areas. For example, one of the things that we are addressing as a delegation, and I'm really proud of the El Paso delegation. For those of you who haven't really watched the legislature for a long time, the El Paso delegation wasn't always the most united delegation, but now we're like best friends. We talk at 11 o'clock at night, and we're still talking about what we're going to do next session. And so what we are thinking about when it comes to criminal justice is, again, we came out of session, and three months later was a shooting. And that has really created the lens for how we want to move forward, how we want to think about, for example, the digital citizenship. One of the reasons that the shooting happened was this web-based forum that created a lot of these dialogues and discourse about anti-immigrant, anti-Latino rhetoric, and encouraged the shooter to come to our community. And so when we're thinking about criminal justice, we're not just looking at it in one lens. We're looking at how do we just make our community safer, and that means we need to do a lot of different things, including starting in our local public schools with some digital literacy courses, and all the way to really reforming the ways we think about our prison systems, etc.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Dr. Gonzalez. One of the greatest things that we as realtors adhere to is called the Code of Ethics, where we want housing equality for all. When you think about fair and equitable access to housing in Texas, what actions do you think the state legislature could take to ensure that more Texans have the ability to live where they want to live and own their own homes? Representative Davis, we'll start with you.
Well, thank you. That's a great question. And in fact, earlier, in the year, I was asked by Representative Jessica Gonzalez, who is from the Dallas area, to be a part of a bipartisan group of legislators that will be pushing legislation to end discrimination in not only employment, but housing and in public accommodations as to our GLBT community. And so she's spearheading that effort, and I'm honored to join her on that legislation as one of her authors, as well as one of my Republican colleagues, Todd Hunter from Corpus Christi. So there really is going to be a bipartisan push for, this non-discrimination legislation, which is really necessary, because even though, recently the United States Supreme Court has granted protections for employment, we still don't have state or federal protections in housing or public accommodations. And that actually has a negative effect on the Texas economy and people wanting to move here or have conventions here. So in a time where we really need all of, the sales tax revenue and, as much as we can do for our economy, the last thing we want to do is be known as a state that discriminates against the GLBT population. So, I know that's one thing specific to housing we're going to be working very diligently on next session.
Absolutely. Representative Gonzalez, what are your thoughts on this subject?
I totally want to echo everything Representative Davis has said. I want to thank her for being such a huge champion and advocate for LGBTQ equity and equality. One of the things that really struck me was when you asked the question, how to help people own their own homes. As someone who is a millennial, who has as you can say, Dr. Gonzalez, multiple degrees, it meant I have a lot of student loans. I really sympathize with all of my generational peers in our struggle to really have home ownership. And a lot of that stems from having a lot of college loans. I think if we want, again, I'm a big advocate for looking at things in a very complex and longitudinal ways. Like yes, we need to create access to housing through making sure we're not being discriminatory, But another way to create access to housing is rethinking how we are funding our institutions of higher education. So when people graduate from college and get their jobs, they're not having to choose between owning a new home or paying their student loans, that they can just not have as many loans and really start to create that generational capital through owning property and their own home. So for me, I'm really excited to think about how we're funding institutions of higher ed, because I really want all of my generational peers and the generation that comes after me to have that ability that my dad had when he came out of college.
Absolutely. Representative White, we're going to switch here to you on a different topic. You've had the fascinating assignment of being appointed to the redistricting committee this year. What has that process looked like leading up to 2021, and what will happen in the committee between now and the beginning of session?
Well, it was a process that was going along fairly well before we had this thing come up called COVID-19. Chairman Phil King, who chairs that committee, was doing a very good job. We had maybe 2 to 3 dozen committee hearings throughout the state where we would go and sit and listen to our constituents in these various communities, talk about how they like their representation to look, how they want the legislature to proceed on this most important issue. So I don't know how that looks. At the same time, we have this issue with the census. I think the census, which is one of the reasons you do the census, right, is redistricting, right? The census process has been frustrated due to COVID-19. I think we're going to see our Texas Secretary of State weigh in on ensuring that more Texans respond to the census. I think the feds are not going to rush the census process. So we may need to go overtime into a special session to make sure we do it right, we do it in a transparent way, and we make sure the system is not rigged. No one wants a rigged situation. So we'll see how it looks going forward as we emerge out of COVID-19.
Absolutely. We're getting close to the end of our session here, but I have 2 questions. We as realtors really love to be involved in the legislative process. In fact, we have thousands of our colleagues who come and visit you. What do you think this year would look like? And if the Capitol remains closed in 2021, what's the best way for us as realtors to be involved? And we'll start with Representative Davis, and then all 3 of y'all can answer that.
Okay.
Well, I think first and foremost, the best way to be involved is for, your members to know who their state representative is and who their state senator is, and make sure that you have, established contact and a relationship. And, a lot of us, we see so many people, meet so many people, but when we see certain faces, we start associating like this person with this issue, this advocate with this issue. So you want to be that member's person, if that makes sense. So I would just encourage everyone to just reach out and touch base with their state representatives and their state senators. And once you have formulated your legislative agenda, start setting up Zoom calls. I mean, I don't know very many people that are meeting in person right now, but definitely willing. Every member I know or that I've spoken with is having Zoom calls or just telephone calls, just, kind of prepping us for the next session, because y'all are the experts on, we're representative, we're a representative body. So take that for what it's worth. But I don't know, what the Capitol's even going to look like in terms of people coming in and out. There's usually an advocacy day for every type of organization. I don't know if that's going to occur. And so I think now it's just really important to just establish relationships with the folks that represent you, so that they know who to go to whenever they have questions.
Absolutely. Representative Gonzalez, what about you? Or Representative White, we'll go with you.
Okay. Well, look, Jeff, this is what is so fascinating about the realtor industry and your profession, is when I talk to realtors in my district, you know, they don't come to me just talking about their license or something like that. They're talking to me about flood control. They're talking to me about schools. They're talking to me about healthcare. They're talking to me about internet access, because, you know, when you have to do showings throughout the evening, from home to home, these are the questions that you're asked by your potential customers, those property owners, those prospective property owners. So I would urge you and encourage you to continue doing the work that you're doing, because you have this unique integrated approach that, you know, when you sell, someone's home is going to probably be their most expensive asset, you know, for their house, for their family. So you're selling a community, you're selling an experience, and I could sit and talk to realtors all day, because you have this integrated approach to policy making.
Absolutely, Dr. Gonzalez.
Jeff, I'm glad this is the last question. I know we're coming close to time, but I just wanted to say, like, you're right. Realtors are rock stars. I connect coming to the legislature and being engaged and being involved. And not just what I think is the most powerful is not just being engaged and being involved during session, because honestly, by that time, it's a little bit too late in a lot of ways, but being involved during the interim. And so I would want to encourage and maybe just applaud the hard work you're already doing, because I always tell people, if the first time we see you is during session, by that time it might already be too late. And not that we don't care, but that's just that's the speed of the legislature. Think about it. We only get together every 2 years for 140 days. That means so much work is happening in the interim. That's when we need to hear from you the most. So what I will say, for those of you who haven't reached out to your legislator, don't wait till session. Do it right now. Do it this week. Most of us are at home on Zoom anyways. I'm pretty sure we'd be glad to have a meeting with you.
Perfect. We do appreciate the way you are all working together, coming from different parts of the state and different parties that you represent. So thank you. You know us and you know our lobbyists, and we can guarantee that they'll be in touch with you. A few takeaways that I have for today. We were talking about redistricting. For those of you who are watching, if you have not completed the census, click over to another tab. Go do it right now. It took me 25 seconds when I did it from my computer. Go do it right now, because we want you to be counted. As a reminder, we as realtors, we are not a certain party, left or right, Democrat or Republican. We're the realtor party, so we're going to support our friends on both sides of the aisle. And thank you so much for joining us today. We greatly appreciate your expertise and wish you the best of luck in the 2021 year for the 87th legislative session. So I know you can't see everyone. If we were in a room, we would stand up and give you a round of applause, but everyone will be clapping at home. And thank you all for joining us. Stay safe.